back in England with Osmosna Moto, riding my old 1990s BMW F650. Since we've been back here on this island, the sun's been shining, we've been out riding, we've had a song in our heart, we've been full of joy and glee, and for me, nostalgia. For this motorbike, back in the early 90s, took me all the way from England to Kuala Lumpur. We were out riding yesterday when coming the other way was some lads on those great big gargantuan machines that they call adventure bikes nowadays. There were some friendly lads, they waved and they nodded and I waved back. And as I waved back at those lads, I had a feeling that I'm not particularly proud of. A feeling of smugness, I suppose, because I thought, you call those adventure bikes? They're not adventure bikes. I thought, this humble old girl that would not warrant a second glance in the company of the behemoths you ride. This has taken me overland halfway around the world, and that's what makes this a real adventure bike. I remember leaving England on this bike. I stood on the ferry deck and I watched the white cliffs of Dover disappear into the distance. And the feeling I had, all I knew was my next scheduled destination was Kathmandu. We got to Kathmandu and from there continued, and the journey eventually took us to the bottom of the Malay Peninsula, where stuff happened and the motorbike ended up in Rotterdam. But for now, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this adventure bike and what makes it an adventure bike.
Following that trip, the bike found its way to a shed in the UK, where it languished for 10 years. Then it found its way to a different shed for 10 more years, where it collected dust and cobwebs and mice. And finally, Mr. Harding, he who has often been mentioned on this channel, took it to a third shed with a large collection of hammers, where he brought the old girl shuddering back to life. For with a machine such as this, a hammer, a screwdriver and an adjustable spanner should fix most things. Fortunately, a degree in computer science is not needed. And so, here we are, the old F650 and me reunited once more, 25 years since that transcontinental epic odyssey. During this past week, riding through England's green pastoral shires, I've been reflecting on where this bike took me and what we did and saw and smelt and felt, and the reasons I chose this bike above all others. I considered what an adventure bike was when I bought this, and what the terms come to mean in the hands of a manipulative industry and armchair experts and the weekend warriors of the internet. Why did I choose this bike? Why not something bigger and grander? Why a machine so humble? Well, my girlfriend at the time was meeting me in Istanbul, from where we would continue together across the Bosphorus into Asia. So our machine needed to be big enough for two people with at least some luggage. It needed to be rugged enough to tackle some rough terrain, and it needed to be reliable. It needed to be, and I think herein lays the crux of the matter, it needed to be physically as manageable as possible. After all, I may need to haul it onto a truck if it broke down, or we may need to haul it onto a raft to cross a river. If we dropped it, we'd need to be able to lift it. Maybe we'd have to put it on the back of a donkey to cross a mountain. And of course, as with most people setting off on a trip such as this, money was of no small concern, so it needed to be cheap to buy and to run. An Africa Twin would have been great. I would have liked one of those, but they were pricey and bulky and I expect thirsty. An XR400 would have been brilliant for a solo trip. Plank light seat and the starting difficulties aside, it would have been ideal. Yamaha's venerable XT600 Tenere would have been super, though perhaps a tad small for two people, and I think the same is true of Honda's Dominator 650. There was the old air-cooled 800 GS BMW. That was a stalwart of overlanders at the time, but they were thirsty and bulky. I think the best bike for the job, the one I should have got, was the then new BMW F650 Dakar. It was of course more expensive to buy, but in the long run the superior fuel economy would have offset much of that. The new 4-valve GS BMWs had recently been released, but they were just so big they were ridiculous for a proper adventure, and they were way too expensive for a journey that meant being careful with your money. Well, that was the case until a couple of years later when Hollywood superstars appeared on the road with multi-million-dollar bank accounts and gargantuan support teams. Remember, most of us on the road, mostly alone and mostly broke. And so at sub 200 kilos, sipping fuel at a then economical 20 kilometres a litre, and just far enough out of date that I managed to pick up a bargain, the F650 was the machine for me. I bought a pair of pannier racks and a pair of soft panniers and some straps with which to lash the panniers to the racks. I bought a big black 27 litre fuel tank. I fitted a pair of Renthal handlebars and some handguards. I got a see-through map pocket. I put a map in that and hung it round my neck. That was as close as we got to a GPS back then. I got a couple of maps, a carnet de passage, visas for Iran, Pakistan and India, and off I went. When I considered what spares to take, my logic was, if I can't take everything and I don't know what will break, I may as well take nothing. But that seemed a tad too minimalist. So I took some filters and tubes and a workshop manual and a pump and some tyre irons and a puncture kit and some basic tools. I forgot my 17mm spanner, which was the first tool I needed when I did an oil change. So I bought one in a dusty, noisy market somewhere east of the Bosphorus. So I guess I really could have bought all the tools along the way. But if you're setting off on a trip like this, I do very much encourage you to take a good toolkit. Can you fix a puncture? I was often asked. And I have to say, I reckon you'd be a little crazy to set off on such a trip if you can't fix a puncture. But folks said I was crazy to do the trip anyway, so it's all down to your definition of sanity. Talking of being crazy, in the lead up to departure, folks would ask me my intended route. And when I told them that Iran was along the way, they'd say I was either crazy or very brave. And knowing I'm bereft of courage, I presumed insanity. What I didn't know at the time was that the world is fueled by the unfounded prejudices and fears born of ignorance. For the Iranian people are unsurpassed in kindness and hospitality, and the greatest takeaway from my trip was to be sceptical of all notions, prejudices and tales of things I had not experienced for myself.
So if you want an adventure on a motorbike, please don't get caught up in the endless web of misinformation and total codswallop from the internet that so often leaves people stranded before they even reach the starting blocks. What you'll hopefully learn when you go on your big journey is that the less you have, the freer you are. And to be free of the burden of a $30,000 motorbike and instead just be riding a $3,000 motorbike, it will make you freer. A pair of Timberlands, a pair of Levi's and a leather jacket. If that's what you've got, that will clothe you. You don't need the latest stuff from Klim to go on an adventure. If you're going from Europe to Asia for navigation, when you wake up in the morning, see which way the sun rises and head towards it. Although having said that, there's a lot to be said for a smartphone. I really do recommend taking a smartphone. Buy a used Honda CB500X, buy some throw-over panniers, throw them on, get some basic tools and some spares and just head off on your journey. Just do it. And if you do it on a bike such as that, it's so much cooler, isn't it, really, than doing it on the bike that everyone thinks you're supposed to do it on. And so, what is it that makes the F650 so much more of an adventure bike than those gargantuan big follies of two-wheelers that I'm so unfond of? What it is that makes this bike such an adventure bike is the fact it took me on one hell of an adventure. Thanks for watching, and if you did like it, maybe give me a thumbs up. Hey, see you in the next one, folks.